Well, thank you guys so much for being on the call today. We just finished recording a podcast on your Clear to Close podcast, and that was a really fun conversation. I encourage everyone to check that out. The Clear to Close podcast itself is amazing. You guys have some really interesting people that you've interviewed on there. So that was fun to be a part of that. But in our conversation, we talked a lot about some of the highlights of the NextGen Homebuyer report that we released recently. Also just generally what the homebuyer experience is for NextGen buyers, what they're looking for, and some of the challenges. So I want to open it up to you guys, and maybe we'll start with you, Alan, in talking about like, what did you find most interesting in terms of what, I think we talked a little bit about this blend between a desire for technology and a desire for advice and kind of that personalized experience. Can you share a little bit on that and your thoughts around that?
Yeah, absolutely. And first off, thanks for coming on our podcast a few weeks ago. It was a blast to have you and really enjoyed the conversation. I think one of the things that I think your report states really well, which I think is interesting, and as a millennial myself, I completely buy in and believe is this. I think there's a stigma or a belief that millennials just want a pure Amazon experience and to do an online card and somehow purchase a mortgage through that flow. And that's not the case. Like you can talk to millennials, and you can also look at industry data. There's a ton of industry data around millennials wanting an expert in their corner for this incredibly confusing, intimidating, high consequential decision of buying a mortgage. And I think that is the truth, and that millennials want that expert, and they actually prefer to talk on the phone and to text with somebody to help them through that experience. I think though, where you're going to lose a millennial though, is if there is a lack of technology doing things that technology is really good at. Like millennials as a whole are really well versed in what can tech do and what can tech not do. And if you encounter situations like, hey, I need you to fax me over your bank documents, like millennial is going to read through that and be like, no, like this guy or gal is not an expert. And I think so it's letting tech do what it does best, but saving the time for that expertise, because that's really what they're looking for at the end of the day.
Totally. I forgot faxing existed. So that's the throwback.
So real quick tangent on that. At a mortgage conference not too long ago, we had someone visit our booth and ask if we had a fax integration into our software. So it does still exist out there somehow.
Alan started laughing, and the guy was like, "No, I'm serious. Like, can you guys build that for us?" It was the funniest. I was watching. It was the funniest thing ever.
Wow, that's so interesting. So yeah, I think I am really passionate about that idea of letting technology do what it's great at, and then also having that advice factor or time for the loan officer to really feel empowered through in having that conversation. Brian, anything else you'd add around that?
Yeah, I mean, I've been in mortgage for a long time, and even going through the experience with talking with a loan officer, there's still a lot of nuance that every mortgage person doesn't know. So it's interesting when you even talk to people in the industry, when they go get a loan, there's something that they learn every time. So it's true that you can't just go and select a couple of options and your refrigerator shows up in the form of a beautiful house and a mortgage. There's the options to buy up, buy down. Are you gonna go below the 20%? How are you gonna do the PMI? There's a couple of different ways to do that too. So those things like really need to be talked about. You can't hover over a button and get all the detail and things like that online. So I completely agree that a lot of loan officers are very good at what they do, and they can have a wide variety of areas to go down with these customers to talk, hey, do you really want to get detailed about the capital markets and the pricing of your mortgage? Or do you really just want to talk about documents and how do you get them to me best? And which ones do you want? Yeah, that's the critical part of the sales process that people are really good at solving, and not necessarily software.
Yeah, well, and that brings us to another big conversation we had on the podcast was around financial literacy. And in our report, we found that was it 1 in 5 of our NextGen respondents said that they were not confident in any step of the home buying process. And I think there's just, in all the conversations I have with first-time home buyers, and even myself having been in this industry since I was a kid basically, because my dad was in mortgage all growing up, but I think it's really overwhelming, and there are so many options, and there's so much nuance there. I think a lot of people feel really overwhelmed when thinking about even just the basics. So I'd love for you guys to share a little bit of your thoughts on what financial literacy looks like from a loan officer's perspective, where you think lenders should step in on that, and some of the reasons why we think that is important.
Yeah, I believe in the report, it also shows that the real estate agent is usually the person that has the most knowledge, or at least the perceived knowledge from the borrower and the customer of who's driving that conversation. So typically the real estate agent, traditionally in the past refers over to a handful of loan officers, and then the loan officer really dives in. So depending upon which part of that entire home buying process you're in, it could be a different person providing that education. So loan officer, if you have the customer on board, they're ready to buy a house, that's going to look much, much different than if you're talking to a potential first-time home buyer 6 months away from that purchase. So really having that wide range of knowledge is critical. But can you, as a manager or an executive of these mortgage companies, rely on all of your loan officers being able to have great conversations and navigate all of them in each one of those scenarios and the hundreds of other scenarios that there are? I don't think you can. So how can you help and support your sales staff with other folks or materials and things to really support the wide range of borrowers that are going to come through the funnel with a wide variety of time horizons and when they're going to buy? That's what I think is important for folks to talk about.
So, Alan, anything that you would add to the conversation around financial literacy and what the role is, I guess, of a lender in that conversation?
Yeah, I think it's an incredibly complicated and sticky subject. Like, I think there's this huge societal piece of we need to do a general better job of educating people of how to balance a checkbook or a bank account, not a checkbook anymore, I guess. But like, how do you have your basic finances? And homeownership is a piece of that. But I think where lenders have a role is to not just default to like, this is a societal issue or this is an education issue in the school system, but is like, if you're a community lender and you are proud that you're in the community, what role can you have in terms of nurturing customers to homeownership? The people who maybe think that you have to have 20% down for a home, and that's the only way you get a home. And they thus are by default, they're saying, well, I can never afford that, so I'm just not going to do it for a long time. Or at the same time is, how do you nurture some of your current customers for refinances by educating them on what does a refinance look like and why does it make mathematical and financial sense to change that? So I think there's two options of one, increasing your top of funnel leads and pipeline, but then also some recapture and gathering some new refinances. I think as a community lender, if you're saying you're in the community and that's your unique differentiation, you got to have it on your radar that you have a seat at this table to solve this problem in your community and get involved. And there's no, I think, silver bullet of how you go solve this, but there's some really, from guerrilla efforts to your general branding and marketing to go have an impact in your community and increase home ownership there.
Yeah, I think it's really interesting how there's so many millennials, NextGen buyers in the marketplace now in the market, but there's so many more that I think would be in the market if they knew that a little bit about the process. I mean, I was talking with a couple of friends who both make over $100,000 a year. They definitely could qualify and think about buying a home now, but they have such low financial literacy that it's just a huge barrier there. And I think, at Cultural Outreach, we really focus on financial literacy oriented content, but I think if you can deliver that and provide people with some sense that you're someone that can provide them with advice and you can have that conversation, a lot of people are just scared to even reach out to anyone. So I think it's important to have that kind of outreach in your community, like you said, to build the brand that says, yes, you can come to me and we'll talk about all of this, So Allison, I know you. Oh, go ahead.
I agree, because a lot of times that scaredness, and I've seen it for the millennial generation that I'm in and even newer, is you're scared to be sold. And so you go have a conversation with somebody who's a professional, and they're going to try to sell you. But what if you don't want to be sold right now? You just want to be educated so that you can be sold in the future. But really, you don't ever want to be sold. You want to make the decision to go and buy. And so that's what I think some of that fear comes in. And you can't build that financial literacy pyramid overnight. It's compounding. You have to work at it. And so if you have the appetite to learn those things, being matched with a team that can help you is absolutely tremendous. But
yeah. No, and it's interesting because in talking about that piece about being sold to, single women are the second largest cohort of home buyers, and we saw a huge disparity even in the NextGen homebuyer report in our data of single women and women generally just feeling a lot of fear and lack of confidence in approaching the home buying process. And one of the big areas that came up was this feeling that they are going to be taken advantage of in some way in that sales process. So I think, yeah, that becomes even critical in thinking about women generally, but certainly no one wants to be sold to. They want to feel empowered to make smart decisions for themselves. So Allison, I was going to direct it back to you because I know you do a lot of the content for Maxwell and are always thinking about how to bring leadership in this area. So anything that you would add to that conversation?
Yeah, well, I first wanted to preface this just by saying that this is such a timely topic and something I've been thinking about lately, especially after Max Out, the conference that we just hosted. We had a session on kind of an economic forecast, and that was led by Mike Frattantoni, the MBA chief economist. And he was just kind of talking through how strong the market's going to be in terms of purchases in 2021 and beyond. The main reason for that being that millennials are reaching kind of like the peak home buying age, somewhere between 31 and 33. So we're just going to see this huge cohort of millennials moving forward to wanting to purchase a first home. And to all of your points, maybe not having that knowledge or confidence to do so. So I think this is going to be a huge opportunity in educating that audience. It's a matter of kind of who takes that on. But I think if we all kind of take some responsibility for that and try to make some movement around this, it's definitely going to be worthwhile. As far as content, I want to move towards a campaign that kind of, our audience being mainly lenders, being able to direct them to the best resources, as well as creating some content of our own that maybe they can use to then pass on to prospective home buyers within the millennial demographic. So for me, that means, we want to create content in multiple mediums. I think millennials are very much about kind of expecting different forms of content, whether that's video, more comprehensive, things like that. But just really offering that value that I think is also a millennial expectation of kind of, they don't want to be sold to first. They kind of want that value, that education level to where they can become confident in making a decision about, a lender or moving through the home buying process.
Totally. And that leads back to that conversation that Brian was bringing up around having the, kind of meeting people where they are. Like, you don't want to be sold to right away. You want to be educated. And for a lot of people, when they do receive that education, and you're meeting them where they are on whatever platform as well, but you're providing them with education, then they are ready once they realize, like, okay, here's where I'm at. I know so many people that say they didn't know that they could qualify until they had that conversation with someone. So it just shows how important financial literacy is generally, and doing that outreach as not only part of being part of the community, as Alan was talking about, but also as a part of your marketing. So that's great. Well, I think you guys are all doing amazing stuff at Maxwell, and I really love the Clear to Close podcast. Any last words or thoughts before we close out here?
No, I mean, I think the only thing I'll say is, that the last thing we were just talking about spurred me to think, something we do at Maxwell frequently is a mortgage is a really complicated product to purchase. And if you think we're all consumers, even if we're the business owner. So if you think about how you went and had complicated purchases and how you bought complicated or big consequential products, like whether that was a car or, an expensive item or whatever it is for your house, there's a long investing and researching and getting committed and then finally making a purchase decision, that as you think about nurturing these customers, it's not about turning the transactions within a day or 2 days. It's about nurturing these customers, convincing them that you're their expert, and then having little success marks on the way before they are ready to purchase. So I think about the long term, think about yourself as a customer and when you buy things, and just kind of being in the focus of nurturing those customers to the purchase, and don't be down on yourself if they don't turn into full leads on day one. It's a long-term play, but it's highly rewarding.
Yeah, that's such a good point. That's great. Well, thank you guys so much for being on the call today. And where should we direct people to check out your podcast?
Yeah. So anywhere you consume podcasts, Apple, Google, Spotify, I think is 95% of people. It's called Clear to Close. It's got a green and blue logo. You can find us there. You can also go to himaxwell.com. We have a podcast page where you can see all of our episodes and listen to in the browser if you choose and see fit.
Great. Well, thank you guys so much.